Okay, good morning, everyone. Lovely to have you join me this morning. I'm going to be sharing a little on the power of storytelling, unlocking connection, engagement, and influence. My name is Duro Oye, and I'm going to go into an introduction shortly afterwards. So I'm doing this session a bit differently today. So it's the first time I'm actually delivering it like this. So I hope it all goes well. Usually you tend to start with the concepts and then examples and then break that down. But I'm actually going to start with an example. So, what's the point of talking about storytelling without actually telling you a story? So, here goes. I'm going to tell you a story using two pictures. And as you could probably tell, the pictures are of a younger version of me and a more older, more refined version of me. So this story is of a talented individual called Duro Oye, who happens to be an award-winning documentary filmmaker, founder and CEO of 2020 Levels, a leading charity that supports young Black individuals in the areas of professional, personal, and business support. So let's start with the first picture. In the first picture, you'll see me. I'm at the tender age of 18 on my way to university. And I had around 80K to my name. Now, you might be wondering whether that's my student loan. No, it's not my student loan. This is money that I acquired from being involved in the term that I coined to be street enterprise. And I'll leave you to allow your imagination to run wild with what I mean with that, but that's not the topic of today's discussion. As you can imagine, as a young 18-year-old with that amount of money acquired, I felt on top of the world. I felt untouchable, and my ego was probably bigger than the train carriage that I was sitting in on that day. But we fast forward 18 years to the second picture, and I'm a completely different person. Recognizing that the life that I lived at 18 was not sustainable long term, I needed to make a change. At the age of 21, I graduated from university, and that's when I decided to take my walk with Christ seriously. It was a decision that I made for myself. I grew up in the church, but as you do as a young boy growing up in a council estate, you get attracted by different things. There was always one foot in, one foot out. But at the age of 21, I decided to jump in head first and, forego the lifestyle that I lived before and just focus on building a strong, robust relationship with the Lord. But that change that I'm talking about took roughly about 7 years for it to be expressed outwardly. It was an inward change that I needed. Essentially, it was a mindset shift. So, what did I change? I changed the information that I was feeding myself. I changed the people that I was around. I changed the environment that I was in. Essentially, I buried myself in the church and I was surrounded by, for the very first time, strong male role models, which is something I never really had growing up. So during those 7 years, I rediscovered myself. I rediscovered that the skills and the ability that I had as a youth that I acquired from street enterprise could actually be used as transferable skills. So these were skills that businesses and entrepreneurs could pay good money for. Nobody ever told me that growing up. People recognized these skills, but they kind of showed me how to utilize these skills in some of the wrong ways. And I had no access to people that were using these skills in a way that was straightforward, to say the least. And I didn't recognize that until I had these mentors that I talked about. These mentors were from outside my community, so a lot of them didn't actually look like me or grow up in the same kind of environments as that I did. So my transition, even though it was hard, but it was also smooth. So unlike others in my position, peers, friends, that were involved in the things that I was involved in, I don't have the same horror stories as they do. So I've never been shot, never been stabbed, never been to prison. So my transition was smooth. If I wanted to leave that life, I could turn things around and, just essentially pretend like that person never existed. But while I was on that journey, I started thinking to myself, what about the others? Those whose transition would be rocky, those whose past was a lot more checkered than mine. Those individuals that people would laugh at them, they'll laugh them out of interviews because their shirts were oversized or their blazers were wrinkled. And those that didn't have any formal clothes to show up to these interviews in, or those that essentially would have to bump a train to get to an interview or to get to work if they managed to secure a role because they couldn't afford the peak travel and they needed to hide in the toilets while the ticket inspectors went by. So they essentially were late for work and they lost their jobs. These are all true stories, by the way. The difference with me is that I had a strong family unit, I had a strong support system, so my transition was a lot easier than most. You don't necessarily think about those on the other side, but it made me think, how can I help those individuals? How could I help those individuals before long that would essentially slip back into their old habits of crime? Um, those that just needed that bit of a mindset shift before they got lost to the streets. I thought I needed to break the cycle. So I had unique experience and unique insight into their way of life, and I could help. So even though it was just a handful, even if it was just a handful of people that I helped, I knew that I'd be making a difference to society. So I started with 6, and these were 3 prolific ex-gang members from Brixton, 3 from Peckham, um, made a documentary about their lifestyle, and that's where I kind of caught that bug for affecting change in people's lives. Took the concept back to my church, started with another 6 young people from my church. They invited their friends invited their friends, and it just kept growing from there. To the point where today, through the organization, we transform the lives of over 2,400 young people right across London. But that's it. That's my story. That's the story of my big why that gave birth to 2020 levels that you hear of today, which we'll talk about in a little while. But in my line of work, I often get asked about my why. You know, what's your big why? Why are you doing the work that you do? And that's a version of the story that I tend to tell. And that's the basis of today's talk that I want to use to just kind of dissect what I mean by the power of effective storytelling. So, what is storytelling? It's the art of using words, images, or other mediums to convey a message, to evoke emotion, and to create a narrative. My background's creative, so I'm really good at finding words, images, telling a story, ideally through the screen, that can evoke emotion. And I use that in my day-to-day work when I'm talking about the changes that we affect in the lives of young people. You see, the thing is that stories are memorable, they're relatable, and they help individuals retain information, especially if you find a story that really resonates with someone. They'll remember that for a very long time. So elements of compelling storytelling or of a compelling story. You need characters. In the story that I shared earlier, I was the main character, and there was other characters that enabled me to be able to achieve the things that I went on to achieve. You need a plot, conflict, essentially, so something that happens in the middle of the juicy part, and then a resolution. Like I mentioned earlier, stories create emotional connections with your audience. So if you're trying to leave a lasting impact in the minds of someone, think about how you can use your story to create that emotional connection. Right. So using your story, what are times and parts and areas where you can use your story? Like I mentioned, we use it in business application. So it helps our partners connect with our wider purpose, with the wider purpose of our organization. You as an individual, you can incorporate your story into your presentations when you're talking about your why. For purpose-led businesses, it's always easy to kind of talk about the purpose of the organization, why it aligns with you, and why, you know, people that you're speaking to, your audience, should also buy into what it is that the change that you're trying to make as well. It's important to have a strong opening and closing, and also to make it memorable, so that even after you finish, people are still thinking about what you said or talking about what you said. As a documentary filmmaker, what we were told in film school is that your films and your projects are supposed to evoke conversation. So you're talking about a particular topic, and that should open the door for a conversation. So in my filmmaking days and years, I like to find a topic that people might know about, but helping them dive deeper into it and opening up room for conversation around that topic. And yeah, final thing is to use visual aids because people will always remember. So this is some pictures from some of our early sessions. And I'm going to leave you with another visual aid, which kind of explains and encompasses 2020 levels and the work that we do.